The anesthesia was still heavy in my blood, a thick, dragging weight that made opening my eyes feel like lifting iron shutters. The first thing I registered was the ceiling, tiled, white, and endless. Then came the smell. That distinct, sharp cocktail of rubbing alcohol and floor wax that screams hospital. But before my vision cleared, the pain announced itself. It wasn't a sharp stab. It was a deep, hollow ache in my flank, a reminder that a part of me was gone. I had done it. I had actually done it. I shifted my weight, and a groan escaped my lips before I could catch it. A nurse, a young man with gentle hands, was at my side in an instant, checking the monitors. I blinked at him, my throat feeling like it was lined with sandpaper. I wanted to ask about him, about my son, about Hendrickson. See, when you become a father, you sign an invisible contract with the universe. You agree that your life is no longer the most important one in the room. You agree that you will carve pieces out of yourself, your time, your sleep, your bank account, and yes, even your flesh, if it means your child survives. It's a terrifying vulnerability, loving someone that much. It exposes you. It makes you naive to things you should see coming, because love has a way of blurring the sharp edges of reality. If you're listening to this, and you've ever loved someone enough to ignore the red flags, please, take a moment to click the like button. It helps this story reach others who might need to hear it. Share this with a friend who understands what sacrifice really means. And leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I'd love to know who is sitting with me in this hospital room today. And if you want to join a community that values truth over deception, please subscribe. I closed my eyes again, listening to the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. I imagined Hendrickson in a room nearby, his color returning, his future secured because of the kidney I had just given him. I felt a swell of pride that was stronger than the pain. I didn't know then that the pride was a lie. I didn't know that the silence in the hallway wasn't peaceful. It was the calm before a devastation I never could have predicted. My mind drifted back to the day he asked. It wasn't even a month ago. The winter wind was howling off Lake Michigan, rattling the windows of the old Victorian house I had spent 40 years restoring. Hendrickson had come over for dinner, which was rare. He sat at the mahogany table, pushing a fork through my homemade pot roast, looking gray and defeated. He told me he was dying. He didn't say it dramatically. He said it with a terrifying stillness. Renal failure, Dad. End stage. He had produced a folder of papers, sliding them across the table. I didn't read them. Why would I read them? He was my son. His eyes were rimmed with red, his hands trembling just enough to sell the performance. He talked about dialysis not working, about waiting lists that were 5 years long, about how he didn't have 5 years. He had maybe 5 months. Looking back, I wonder about the mechanics of a lie that big. How do you look at the man who taught you to ride a bike, the man who held you when your mother died, and tell him a story designed to harvest an organ from his body? It requires a specific kind of emptiness, a hollow space where a conscience should be. I remembered grabbing his hand across the table. I remembered the tears on my own face, hot and fast. "Take it," I had said. "Hendrickson, take it. I'm a match. I know I am." He had cried then, or I thought he had. He squeezed my hand and whispered, "You'd save my life, Dad?" That question haunts me. It echoes in the empty chambers of my memory. I thought he was asking about his survival. I didn't realize he was asking about his bank account. We trust family because we assume they operate under the same moral laws we do. assume that blood creates loyalty. But blood is just biology. Loyalty is a choice. And Hendrickson had made his choice long before he sat at my dinner table. 24 hours passed. The fog of surgery began to lift, replaced by the sharp clarity of post-operative recovery. I was moved from the recovery bay to a quiet room on the 4th floor. Outside the window, the Chicago skyline was a blur of gray steel and falling snow. It was a cold city, but I usually found warmth in its resilience. Today, though, the cold seemed to be seeping through the glass. I kept asking for him. "How is Hendrickson? Is his body accepting the kidney? Can I see him?" The staff was evasive. Not rude, just distant. There was a nurse, a woman named Beverly, who wouldn't meet my eyes when she changed my IV bag. She checked my vitals with mechanical efficiency, her lips pressed into a thin line. When I asked about my son, she simply said, "He is recovering, Hudson. You need to focus on your own healing." There is an instinct you develop when you get older. You start to sense when the frequency of the room changes. Something was wrong. It wasn't the medical complications I feared. It was something in the air. A tension. If Hendrickson was okay, why hadn't he sent a message? Why hadn't he wheeled himself down? We were in the same hospital. We had just shared a life-altering event. I tried to rationalize it. He was probably in more pain than I was. The recipient's recovery is often harder than the donor's. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the solitude of the hospital room was making me anxious. But deep down, in the pit of my stomach, a cold knot was tightening. It's strange how the body knows betrayal before the mind accepts it. The heart recognizes the knife before the eyes see the blade. By the morning of the 2nd day, the silence was deafening. I was sitting up, sipping weak tea that tasted like cardboard. The pain in my side was a dull roar now, manageable but constant. I stared at the door, willing it to open. I wanted to see his face. I wanted to see that flush of health that the doctors promised would return once the new kidney started working. I thought about my wife, Martha. She had been gone for 10 years. If she were here, she would have been pacing the halls, demanding answers. She was the fierce one. I was the steady one. Without her, I felt unmoored. I had raised Hendrickson alone for the last decade, trying to be both mother and father, trying to fill the void she left. I thought I had done a good job. He was successful, driven, always dressed in sharp suits, working in high finance. Sure, he was distant. He missed Christmases sometimes. He forgot birthdays. But I excused it. The world is hard for young men, I told myself. He's building a career. He's busy. We make excuses for the people we love because the alternative, admitting they don't care, is too painful to bear. The door handle turned. My heart leaped. I straightened up, putting a smile on my face, ready to tell him that I loved him, that I'd do it again in a heartbeat. But the smile froze on my lips. It was Hendrickson. But he wasn't in a wheelchair. He wasn't wearing a hospital gown. He walked in wearing a charcoal wool coat over a crisp navy suit, looking like he had just stepped out of a boardroom, not an operating theater. He looked vibrant, healthy, strong. He walked into the room with a stride that was terrifyingly confident. Behind him trailed a woman I didn't know, severe, holding a briefcase, her eyes scanning the room with disdain. "Hendrickson?" I croaked, confusion clouding my brain. You're walking. Should you be walking?" He didn't answer immediately. He stopped at the foot of my bed, looking down at me. There was no warmth in his eyes. no gratitude. There was only a cold, flat calculation. "Hello, Hudson," he said. "Not Dad. Hudson." "I don't understand," I stammered, trying to sit up further, wincing as the incision pulled. "The surgery. It was only 2 days ago. How are you standing?" He didn't speak. He just nodded to the woman. She stepped forward, placing a thick envelope on my bedside table right next to my water pitcher. "I donated my kidney to my son." 2 days later, he sent me to a nursing home. Then the surgeon said, "Well, I haven't gotten to what the surgeon said yet. First, I had to survive what my son said. If you have ever felt your heart break not from sadness, but from the sheer shock of cruelty, you know what I felt in that moment. If you believe that families should protect each other, not destroy each other, please subscribe to the channel right now. Turn on notifications. Let's stand together against this kind of darkness." "What is this?" I asked, my hand trembling as I reached for the envelope. "Ms. Kinsley is my attorney," Hendrickson said, his voice smooth, detached. "She's handling the transition." "Transition?" I pulled the papers out. The legal jargon swam before my eyes, but certain words jumped out. Eviction, transfer of deed, power of attorney, relocation. "You signed the house over to me last month, Hudson, remember? To protect the assets in case the surgery went wrong. You wanted to make sure I was secure." I felt the blood drain from my face. I signed a medical proxy and a temporary trust." "You signed a quitclaim deed," Ms. Kinsley corrected, her voice like grinding glass. "The property at 42 Willow Creek Lane belongs solely to Hendrickson now. And as the owner, he has decided to liquidate the asset." "Liquidate?" I whispered. "That's my home. Hendrickson, that's the house you grew up in. I built the deck with your grandfather. Your mother's garden is in the back." "It's a depreciating asset in a rising market," Hendrickson said, checking his watch. "I've already accepted a cash offer. The developers are tearing it down next week." Tearing it down. My life, my memories, Martha's garden, all of it, erased for cash. "Why?" The word ripped out of my throat, raw and jagged. "I just saved your life. I gave you my kidney. How can you do this?" Hendrickson sighed, a sound of profound boredom. He looked at me like I was a dull child who couldn't grasp a simple concept. "You're old, Hudson. You're alone. The house is too big for you. It's a waste of capital." "I am your father," I screamed, the monitor beside me beeping faster as my heart rate spiked. "I am the reason you are breathing right now." He finally looked at me, really looked at me, and what I saw in his face terrified me more than the eviction. It was a complete absence of humanity. "You served a purpose," he said, "and now that purpose is fulfilled. You don't need a 4-bedroom house to watch TV and sleep. You need supervision. The cruelty of entitlement is a poison. It convinces people that they deserve everything they take, and that anyone who gives to them is merely paying a tribute." He didn't see a sacrifice. He saw a transaction where he was the only winner. "You can't just throw me on the street," I said, tears finally spilling over. I wasn't crying from sadness anymore. I was crying from a helplessness so total, it felt like drowning. "We aren't," Ms. Kinsley said, tapping the second document. "We've arranged for your placement at the Shady Elms Geriatric Center. It's a state-funded facility. You're booked into a shared room. The transport van will be here in the morning." Shady Elms. I knew the place. It was 2 towns over, a grim, understaffed warehouse for the forgotten. a place where people went to stare at walls until they expired. "I'm 62, I whispered. "I'm not an invalid. I work in my woodshop every day. I have a life." "Not anymore," Hendrickson said. "You have no assets, you have no home. And honestly, you're going to be recovering for weeks. Who's going to take care of you? Certainly not me. I have a business to run." He turned to leave. He actually turned his back on me. I donated my kidney to save my son. 2 days after the surgery, he handed me eviction papers and sent me to a retirement home. But just a few minutes later, the surgeon walked in, looking furious. What she said next made him freeze on the spot. The door swung open with enough force to bang against the stopper. Dr. Alana Vane stood there. She was the chief transplant surgeon, a woman I had only seen in passing, masked and gowned. Now she was in a white coat, her face flushed with a rage so intense it seemed to vibrate the air in the room. "Do not take another step," she commanded. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had the authority of a whip crack. Hendrickson froze, his hand halfway to the door handle. Ms. Kinsley took a step back, clutching her briefcase. "Dr. Vane," Hendrickson said, putting on his charming corporate smile, though it faltered at the edges. "We were just leaving. My father and I were discussing his long-term care." "Shut up," Dr. Vane said. She walked into the room, ignoring him, and came straight to my bedside. She looked at the papers scattered on my lap, the eviction notice, the nursing home admission. Her jaw tightened. She turned slowly to face my son. "I just came from the lab," she said. "And then I went to security, and then I called the police." Hendrickson's face went pale. Not the fake pallor of his sickness, but a true waxen fear. "I don't know what you're talking about. This is a family matter." "It stopped being a family matter when you committed fraud against this hospital and assaulted a patient through deception," Dr. Vane spat. She looked at me, her expression softening into a profound pity. "Hudson, listen to me carefully. Your son, Hendrickson, he was never sick." The world stopped spinning. The hum of the heater, the distant traffic, the beeping monitor. It all vanished. "What?" I whispered. "His kidneys are perfectly functional," Dr. Vane said, never taking her eyes off Hendrickson. "The medical records he showed you? Forged. The scans? Doctored. The tests we received from his private specialist before admission? Falsified." "But the surgery," I stammered, my hand hovering over my bandaged side. "You operated. You took my kidney." "We did," Dr. Vane said, and I saw tears of frustration in her eyes. "Because we operated under the belief that he was the recipient. We prepped him, but the moment he was wheeled into the recipient room, the swap happened." "The swap?" I asked, my voice trembling. "He didn't receive your kidney, Hudson." Dr. Vane held up a tablet, showing a security photo. It showed Hendrickson in the loading bay of the hospital, meeting a private ambulance an hour before my surgery. "He sold it," Dr. Vane said. The words hung in the air like smoke. "He brokered a private, illegal deal. There was a buyer, a wealthy private buyer who didn't want to wait on the list. Your son wasn't the patient. He was the middleman. He used you as the supply source." I looked at Hendrickson. He was backed against the wall now, looking like a trapped animal. "It's a lie," he hissed. But his voice lacked any power. "We have the wire transfer records," Dr. Vane said. "And we found the real recipient. He's in a private clinic uptown. We have teams en route there now." My kidney, a piece of my body. It wasn't filtering my son's blood. It was inside a stranger. My son had harvested me. He had looked at his father and seen a bag of spare parts to be sold to the highest bidder. "How much?" I asked. The question felt obscene, but I had to know. Hendrickson didn't answer. He was busy typing frantically on his phone, likely trying to move money. $1.5 million, Dr. Vane answered for him. That was the price. $1.5 million for a healthy kidney from a living donor. $1.5 million, that was what I was worth. That was the price of the bedtime stories, the baseball games, the college tuition I scraped to pay for, the nights I sat up with him when he had a fever. He had sold 40 years of fatherhood for a wire transfer. It makes you wonder about the nature of evil. We think of it as monsters under the bed. But often, it's just indifference. It's just math. To him, the math worked. I was an asset with a value, and he liquidated me just like he liquidated the house. The sound of heavy boots in the hallway broke the tension. 2 uniformed officers and a detective in a trench coat stepped into the room. "Hendrickson Miller?" the detective asked. Hendrickson dropped his phone. "This is a misunderstanding. I have rights. Ms. Kinsley, do something." The lawyer, Ms. Kinsley, stepped away from him as if he were radioactive. "I represent you in real estate matters, Mr. Miller. I do not represent you in criminal organ trafficking cases. I am leaving." She walked out without looking back. "Hands behind your back," the officer said, spinning Hendrickson around. "Dad!" Hendrickson yelled, desperation finally breaking his cool facade. "Dad, tell them! Tell them you consented. Tell them you wanted me to have the money. Dad, please!" I looked at him. I looked at the man who had, minutes ago, condemned me to a shared room in a dying house. I looked at the son who had sold my flesh. I said nothing. I just turned my head toward the window and watched the snow fall. They dragged him out. His screaming faded down the hallway, replaced by the murmurs of shocked nurses and the squawking of police radios. Dr. Vane stayed. She sat in the chair Hendrickson had vacated. She looked exhausted. "I am so sorry, Hudson," she said quietly. "In 20 years of medicine, I have never seen anything this depraved. We should have caught it. The fake records were expert." "It's not your fault," I said. My voice sounded hollow to my own ears. "He fooled me too, and I've known him his whole life." I lay there for a long time after she left. I was technically homeless. My son was in jail. My body was cut open. I felt a grief that was heavier than death. When you bury a parent or a spouse, you grieve their absence. But when you lose a child to their own darkness, you grieve their presence. You grieve the person they were, the person they could have been, and the stranger they actually are. 2 days later, Dr. Vane returned. I was still in the hospital, social services trying to figure out where to send me since the eviction process on my house had indeed been initiated, though frozen by the police investigation. "Hudson," she said, standing at the foot of my bed. "The recipient. The man who actually received your kidney." I tensed up. "I don't want to know." "He knows what happened," she said gently. "He was told the donor was an anonymous volunteer. He had no idea about the payment or the deception. His family, they are devastated that his survival came at this cost to you. Why are you telling me this?" "Because he wants to meet you. He wants to say thank you. And I think you should see him." I wanted to say no. I wanted to curl into a ball and hide from the world. But curiosity is a strange tether. A part of me was living inside this man. He came in a wheelchair, pushed by a young woman with kind eyes. His name was Raymond. He was older than me, maybe 70. He had wild white hair and a face etched with deep lines of laughter and worry. He looked kind. That was the first thing I noticed. He didn't look like a rich monster who bought organs. He looked like a grandfather. "Mr. Hudson?" Raymond said. His voice was raspy. He tried to stand, but his daughter gently held his shoulder. "Please, stay seated," I said. "There are no words," Raymond said, his eyes welling up. "I was a professor of literature for 40 years. I have read every great word ever written, and I cannot find a single one to describe my shame and my gratitude." "It wasn't your fault," I said. And strangely, I meant it. Looking at him, I didn't see the theft. I saw a life saved. We talked for an hour. I learned about his students, his late wife, his love for painting. I learned about his daughter, Eliza, who looked at me with a reverence that made me uncomfortable. Eventually, the conversation turned to the inevitable. "Dr. Vane tells me about your housing situation," Raymond said delicately, "that your son sold your home." "It's complicated," I said, looking at my hands. "But yes, I have to find a new arrangement." Raymond looked at Eliza, and she nodded, a silent agreement passing between them. "I live in a large estate in Evanstown," Raymond said. "There is a guest house on the property. It was my studio, but it has a full kitchen, a bedroom, a fireplace. It overlooks the garden." "No," I said immediately, "I can't. That's charity." "It is not charity," Raymond said firmly. "You gave me time. You gave me years to watch my grandchildren grow. You gave me life, Hudson. The least, the very absolute least I can do is give you a roof. Please, don't make me live with the guilt of you sleeping in a state facility while I sleep in a warm bed with your kidney working inside me." I moved in 3 weeks later. The seasons changed. Winter melted into a muddy spring and then a glorious, green summer. The guest house was beautiful, smelling of cedar and old paint. I set up a small wood shop in the back. But the shadow of Hendrickson loomed. The trial was in September. I had to testify. I had to sit in a witness box and look at my son, who sat at the defense table in a bright orange jumpsuit, stripped of his expensive suits and his arrogance. The prosecutor asked me to recount the events. I told them everything. The dinner, the tears, the surgery, the eviction papers. Hendrickson's lawyer tried to argue that I had given the kidney willingly and that the money was a misunderstanding. But the paper trail was undeniable. The texts to the buyer, the forged medical records, the quitclaim deed on my house. When I stepped down from the stand, Hendrickson caught my eye. He mouthed the word Dad. I paused. I looked at this stranger, and I realized that Dad is a title earned, not just given. And he had fired me from that position the moment he decided I was inventory. I walked past him and didn't look back. The sentence was severe, given the fraud, the organ trafficking, the elder abuse, and the scale of the theft. The judge showed no mercy. Hendrickson was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. I watched him be led away in handcuffs. I expected to feel happy or vindicated. Instead, I just felt a quiet, heavy sadness. It was the end of a lineage, the end of a dream. But as I walked out of the courthouse, Raymond was there, Eliza was there, and Eliza's 2 young sons were there. "Grandpa Hudson!" the youngest one yelled, running toward me. He slammed into my legs, hugging me tight. I froze for a second, then my hand came down to rest on his head. "Hey, buddy," I said, my voice thick. "Ready to go home?" Raymond asked, leaning on his cane. "Yeah," I said. I'm ready. It's been 2 years now. My kidney, our kidney, is doing well. Raymond and I sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun go down. We argue about books. We build birdhouses with the boys. We are a strange, cobbled-together family, stitched up with scar tissue and shared trauma, but we are solid. I never got my house back. The developers dozed it before the legal injunction could stop them. But I realized something. That house wasn't my home. It was just wood and brick. Home is where you are safe. Home is where you are not a transaction. Home is where, if you fall, someone catches you instead of checking your pockets for loose change. I learned the hard way that blood doesn't make you family. Love does. Respect does. And sometimes, you have to lose the family you were born with to find the family you were meant to be with. So, I ask you today, look at the people around you. Do they love you, or do they love what you can do for them? It's a hard question, but it's one worth asking before you find yourself in a hospital bed. If this story touched a nerve, if it made you think about the people in your life, please, I am asking you, subscribe to the channel. Join us. We are building a community of people who believe in second chances and real love. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next story. You are not alone, and you are worth more than what you can give. Thank you for listening.